Previously on agentpalmer.com, Beacon of Hope discovering the legendary Terry Fox through Coupland's coffee book. Gonzo reminds us that Hunter S. Thompson is far greater than fear. And since last episode, have you become a tourist in your own town yet? This is the Palmer Files, episode 81 with Kelly Fiorini, a teacher turned copywriter who has an amazing story about how that journey transpired and a few tips about trying a career before you go full in. Plus, going abroad, having two vastly different teaching experiences, being an introvert, freelance writing, self-evaluation, and much, much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 81st episode is Kelly Fiorini, who is a freelance copywriter and editor and has changed her profession after nearly a decade in teaching to become a self-employed wordsmith. Her journey is interesting to me, not the least of which is because her journey is the opposite of episode 6 of this show, where Carl left engineering to become a teacher. Well, maybe it's not the actual opposite, but career journeys are seldom as linear as they appear. The conversation you are about to hear takes us from Kelly's days as an undergrad up through where she is now and how she made a few decisions along the way that truly changed the direction of her career. We also discuss the importance of a good teacher, career complacency, studying and teaching abroad, being an introvert, exchanging writing for money, self-examination, looking for what's next, and well, all of that and a whole lot more is coming your way shortly. But first, if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Kelly Fiorini at Kelly F. Copy, that's KELLY FCOPY, and this show at The Palmer Files. You can find more information about Kelly at kellyfiorini.com, that's FIORINI, where you can not only contact her or see what she has done, but you can read and follow her blog there as well. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Kelly, you once were a teacher, and now you're not, and we'll probably get into what you're doing now, but why did you first become a teacher?
Okay, well, I have always kind of been interested in teaching. I I majored in English and German in college, actually.
Okay, so hold on.
Interesting.
So we're going to stop right there, because if you're going to major in languages,
Yeah.
you have to become a teacher. Like, what other platform is there?
Yeah. There weren't a lot of other options,
I mean, look,
as my parents reminded me.
well,
Yeah.
okay, so general liberal arts major here, okay? So it's not like I was like, oh, I'm going to be an engineer, right? Like, I had utterly no idea. Is projecting here, because this is my I ended up with liberal arts because I didn't know what I wanted to do. You were interested in languages, but you didn't know what you wanted to do. Is that how you end up in English and German?
100%.
Okay. All right.
You know, I was that college kid that switched majors maybe, 7 times. So
Well,
I
that
knew
puts you ahead of me, though, because I never switched. I went, what's the broadest? Like, somebody was like, what are you going to major in? I was like, what's the broadest thing I can do? And that's what I chose, because liberal arts, and I was like, oh, I don't have to make a decision. Like, that's what that meant. So, do you remember what some of the other majors that you changed were?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of wanted to go into marketing, and I kind
Okay.
of wanted to go into psychology, but then I just kind of landed eventually on English, and I had enough credits going into college that I had some wiggle room and could pick up kind of a second major. And I had taken German in high school for all 4 years, and so I decided, hey, why not? I'll take German.
Okay.
Yeah. So became an English and German double major. And I um, I just was really interested in different cultures also. And so I decided to study abroad for a year when I was in college and went to Austria for a year.
So, you and I share that in common a little bit. I spent a high school semester in Jerusalem.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so it's a little younger, right? And getting that freedom a little bit younger is I will say a very dangerous thing. But um, the opportunity was presented to me, and I took it. And I think most people that have that opportunity to go abroad at a young age take it. I went in with no expectations. It's just like, oh, I don't have to be in my stuffy high school, right? Like that's what it was to me. For you going abroad, was it like this is just going to be did you have any idea, or was it like I just want to get out of here?
I think it was more along the lines of I just want to get out of here. I just
Okay.
wanted to expand my worldview a little bit and see what else was out there. Like you said, I didn't really have too many expectations. I didn't go in with a list of other countries I wanted to visit or things that I wanted to do. I was not a planner that way. I was just kind of like, this sounds like a cool opportunity. I think this is the time to do this.
And so at this point, do you know like all right, I'm going to be a teacher, or like is it still like I'm still trying to figure out my place?
Yes, it was more of the latter. I'm still
Okay.
trying to figure out my place. I had always kind of thought about teaching, but not super seriously. I felt like there was something else out there that could be cool. Maybe I just didn't know about it yet.
Okay.
Like I still wanted to kind of explore my options. So I wasn't really 100% sure.
Now, I like to ask people who ended up being teachers this. When you first think about teaching as an option, with given your majors, is it just, like a professor? Is it middle school? Is it high school? Like when you like if I try and take you back to then and go, you might be a teacher. Like what does that conjure in your mind versus what the reality was? Like, do you know what you thought?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's a really interesting question to me. I don't know. I think I had a kind of a positive view, probably a pretty naive view of teaching, just as something just very, very wholesome and wonderful, which, is part of it, definitely for sure. Um, but I definitely wanted to, explore that as a career path and then also kind of just keep my options open.
So in hindsight, because we have the benefit of hindsight, do you know what those other options would have been maybe back then?
Yeah. I had this idea that maybe it would be cool to be an editor. I thought that seemed really cool, like a cool thing to do with an English degree. Um, but I had no idea how to get into that at all. I mean, that just seems like some nebulous thing, like how does one go out and just say, I'm here, I'm an editor, I'm ready.
Well,
So
when you say editor, though, books, newspaper, like what?
I think maybe books,
Okay.
magazines, that kind of stuff. I didn't like know there was anything really else to edit at the time, like when I saw editor and that was about it, right? I don't know.
I when I got back from overseas and I went to college, my liberal arts majors, I had a choice, and I stayed as the second class of 4-year degrees at my institution, and I chose two minors instead of having like a real major because
Mhm.
I still don't consider liberal arts a real major. But I went with feature writing journalism as one, and the other one was I'm gonna get this wrong. I think it was like internal and corporate communication, or something
Oh,
like that, right? I've used both extensively in a career that really has bounced around all over the place and is now just consulting. But I didn't have a foresight to be like, oh, this is what I want to do. Like there was that it was more like, this is what I think I'm interested in. By the way, that hesitation has never wavered. Like it's always been, I think I want to do this.
Yes.
When you, first of all, you chose English and German. Was there a hesitation when you chose that, or were you like, no, I'm interested in this. Let's go.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a hesitation only because I think my parents were trying to put some, common sense into me and say, where is this going to lead? As parents sometimes do. So I think there was a little hesitation about that because I was a pleaser and I wanted to make them happy. But I also knew that more than anything, I really liked to read and to write, and I loved language. And so, if I was going to be taking all of these classes toward a major, it just made sense to me to do something that I really liked.
I have my parents are both within the arts and humanities is what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
I have an uncle though who's a PhD who mercilessly and to this day was like, you should have just gone to engineering because like they can't teach engineers to write, but they can teach you to be an engineer. And so I still hear from him about that because you'd be eminently more employable now if you had a degree in engineering and you could write like it's all right. That ship has sailed. I get it. So your time overseas, obviously it comes to an end and you've got to come back to the real world.
Yes.
Is it just, I think I'll teach because this is my degree?
Well, so I finished up college and I think I still needed more time to stall.
Okay.
I was not really sure what I wanted to do. I did not know how my skill set was really going to fit into the real world yet. I wasn't 100% tied down to the idea of teaching. So I decided to go abroad again. And I went to Austria again for a second year, but this time as a Fulbright teaching assistant.
Okay.
So teaching, helping to teach English to middle schoolers over in Austria.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you came back from that. Because I know quite a few people. I have a very good friend I went to high school with who was a teacher that was teaching English to students in Korea, and then he moved to Japan and was helping teach English to Japanese students, and then eventually, fast forward a decade, 12 years later, he's like, I think I'm ready to come home now. So that's why I ask, because in my experience, you don't always just end the program and come home.
Yes. No, I mean, that's a great point. It was challenging to leave Europe, to leave Austria. I absolutely loved it there. And I was about to get married though. So marriage brought me home.
Okay.
And, so that was kind of something new and fresh to be excited about. I had a wedding coming up. And so otherwise, I don't know. I don't know how long I would have stayed over there for. Probably a good long while.
All right. So you come back, and where does the career fall in relation to the wedding? Because obviously when you come back, it's not like you have a job waiting for you.
Right. No, I didn't. So I came back and I was frantically looking for jobs, and I found one as basically a database editor. It was kind of a interesting job. I basically read German art magazines. So a very niche kind of thing.
Yep.
I read German arts magazines and wrote abstracts on all of the articles and assigned search indexing terms.
Okay.
Yep. So, I found I found that job. It seemed to fit with my English and German background, and not too many things did. So I went for it, and I stayed there for a few years.
Okay. I mean, that seems like such a stroke of fortune for you. I mean, obviously you're not there anymore, but like that fits, it's not only the two languages, but it's within the arts, which, if you're not going to be in writing and like editing, being in the arts is like really close to that.
Yes, absolutely. So it did feel like a stroke of luck, definitely. And, at this point, I still did not know. I knew that wasn't going to be what I did forever.
Okay.
But for then, it seemed like a really good fit.
Okay. And so are the wheels turning? Because I will be honest with you. I had 2 7+ year stints. Right out of college, I ended up in retail for 7 years. And then I finally forced my way out of retail into a professional marketing gig, and I was there for 9 years. And in both of those situations, no matter how much I either loved or hated them, I stopped thinking about what was next. And this is me right out of college. These are the first 2 jobs I have right out of college. I had 2 jobs in 18 years. And I didn't think about what was next. It's only now that I've been in all this turmoil that I've been focused on what's next, even when I'm doing what I'm doing. So while you're in the database writing abstracts, are you thinking at all about what's next? I mean, obviously you just said this isn't for permanent, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're like, oh, I have an idea of what's next.
Yes. No, that's a really interesting point, actually. And I absolutely relate to it because I mean, I'm the kind of person, I guess, that I'm happy with just kind of being comfortable, and
there's nothing wrong with being comfortable. That's why we call it comfortable.
Right. And so I'm like, this is okay. This is all right. I've got a good solid job. I'm making enough to support myself, and the people I worked with were nice. And so and my husband, my new husband at the time, he got a job there as well. So we were both working there. He was just in the next room over. So, for me at the time, I was like, this is okay. Like I knew in the back of my mind, I guess, that it wasn't going to be forever, but I didn't actively plan a way out either.
Okay. So I don't need the gory details, but like obviously at some point you're not there anymore.
Right.
So just a quick yes or no. Was it your decision to leave?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes. It was my decision to leave. I did get to a point finally, I don't know how many years I was there, but 4 or so. But I did get to a point where, I was by myself in the cubicle all day long. I mean, it's completely independent solo work. My gray, tiny cubicle, doing the same thing day in, day out. And I just thought, I'm ready for something new.
Okay.
My husband went into teaching. He jumped first.
Okay.
He's like, what? I kind of want to do something that is a little bit more engaging, interactive. I've always kind of thought about teaching. And so, he kind of jumped first and went and got his master's in teaching. And I watched him and supported him going through that process. And then I was like, you know what? That seems like a pretty good idea. I've got no better ideas.
Okay. Yeah.
I loved working with, I've always loved working with kids, and, just to kind of make sure, I went out and I got a tutoring job at a local tutoring center.
See, that's smart. Like you are immediately smarter than almost everyone. 'Cause like most people don't do the try before you buy as far as careers go. And that's exactly what you did. And that's brilliant.
Yes, yes. And it was good. It was so refreshing to, I tutored um, all kinds of things from elementary all the way up to high school to kids working on, ACT, SAT prep. And, it was just so refreshing. Kids bring such a unique, fun, fresh perspective. And I was like, wow, yeah, this is what I'm missing. This is what I need. And decided to go back and get my master's in teaching too.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I've heard, we don't need to go through the horror. I've heard a lot of horror stories about people with teaching degrees trying to become teachers. We're
Yes.
going to skip that because we know that I know, and now the audience knows you became a teacher.
Yes.
So what's your first gig when you finally get actually, when you finally get your first gig, Miss Fiorini, is it Miss Fiorini or is it Miss Kelly? Because maybe it's my age showing, but like I remember not calling Miss first name or Mr. first name. I remember that at a certain point in my education.
Yes. Yeah, no, everybody called me Miss Fiorini. Some of them, I got a lot of various nicknames over the years when they couldn't sometimes pronounce Fiorini,
Okay.
so altered into various forms. But yeah, I got my first teaching gig at an amazing school. I got really lucky again. Really, really great school. I was teaching 7th and 8th grade, and I really loved it. I actually, as a teacher, I only taught at 2 different schools. So over the 10 years that I was teaching. So the first one was this really small school. I had really small class sizes. It was basically living the teaching dream. But I did leave because basically I wanted to go teach in the district that my husband taught in and that our kids were going to school in.
Okay.
So that just made sense to me. And I just kind of wanted to push myself and try something new, I think.
Now,
position.
What? So this 7th and 8th grade first gig dream, when you change, are the class sizes bigger?
Yes. Yes. They're much bigger classes. My first school, I think I had, 12 to 16 kids in a class, even though it was a public school. So it was very small. But, that meant that also on the flip side, I was the only 7th and 8th grade language arts teacher. And, that's tricky because you don't have anybody to collaborate with really and to learn stuff from. So, I kind of gave up the small class sizes, but I gained a team and collaborators and all kinds of other wonderful things.
Did you stay in 7th and 8th grade?
I did.
Okay.
I was a 7th and 8th grade teacher my whole career. A lot of times when I tell people I was a middle school teacher, they were like, "Oh, I could never teach the middle school age." But I just love that age so much. It's just so fun to me. They're really becoming who they're going to be.
In hindsight, when I think back, yes, absolutely. But then again, like this is not going to come as a shock to anybody listening. And this is definitely not going to come. This is more going to come as a shock to my parents, who will get me to admit this. Like, I was a troublemaker, not for any particular reason other than I was bored. And I'm not going to name my high school, but like, let's be real. I was probably more well-read than most of my English teachers.
Wow.
Because I grew up in a house where reading was important, and I was stuck in a very rural, not small class size. I was stuck in a very rural educational system that was not backwards, but it was rigid, and there was no room for thought, and that just made me bored. So if you challenged me, right, like if you came at me with like, how come you haven't raised your hand in 2 weeks? I was going to ask you a question you couldn't possibly answer, and I knew that. I was going to be that student. I feel bad. Maybe I slightly feel bad that I did that to some teachers, but they weren't engaging me. So I look at, I hear you and I go, well, you would have been a perfect teacher for me. But I had in high school, I had maybe 2 teachers that really understood students. I'm not going to say me, but they understood students. Everybody else, we escaped. The people that I talked to from that high school, we escaped. We didn't survive. It was escape. And
Yes.
it's kind of one of the reasons that I'm fascinated by teachers, because like, if you think it's a good gig and you run into me, you might reconsider if I'm on a bad day. Like, I'm not.
Absolutely not, though. Absolutely not. Like I can kind of picture you as a middle school student, and I just think you would be super fun to teach.
Yeah, but I mean, look, when I was abroad, I had a history teacher who let us discuss history. So
Yeah.
it wasn't, and I think that was one of the reasons that I had a problem in my my original high school was so I would have, I'm trying to do the math here. I skipped a year. I got out of there a year early, thank God. But like, I would have graduated in 2001. Instead, I was on college campus in 2001. But at that time, in the late 90s, early aughts, at least in my school district and the school districts around me, as I found out later, it was all about test scores. It wasn't really about teaching necessarily as the way we think about teaching.
Mhm.
And I think that I had a problem being like everybody else.
Mhm.
And I don't know. It's very weird because like you grow up, especially middle and high school. That's all you know, and unless you move around, you think
Mhm.
everybody else has that experience.
Yeah.
Because there's other kids out there, and they're sitting
Mhm.
in their class waiting to just whatever. Like, they can't be having fun either. And then you run into teachers that are like, "No, I had great students." Like, wait, what? That wasn't my experience. That's not fair. I mean, I've gotten over it. Like, I'm not bitter, but like, to hear you say that you would have had fun with me, that's unique, because I feel like in my entire career as a student, I've had maybe, even in college, I had maybe a handful of teachers that I can say that about.
And that's a shame, I think, because I mean, education can be such an amazing thing. It can be such an amazing thing. And I 100% hear what you're saying because, I mean, to your point, I think, I'm about the same age as you are. And I mean, my educational experience was a lot different than the educational experiences of my students, all these years later.
Yeah.
Um, and so I feel like education has come a long way. There's still a long way to go, though.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's it's all perfect and rosy by any means, but there is a lot of that one size fits all mentality, I think, in the educational system. But just for me, I just think of my personal experience as a teacher, and the big thing for me, the thing that made teaching so interesting and exciting was basically like meeting students where they are,
Okay.
and for who for whom they are, at that moment in time. That's what made it so much fun for me. I tried to build connections with, the super quiet, shy students that hardly said anything the whole year, and also build connections and, with the students that didn't ever want to sit down, that just wanted to stand and move around and while we read a story. So, there were students that were struggling with personal issues, and there are students, and that kind of prevents them from being in a mindset in a place where they can't learn. And where they can learn. And, there's just so many different students and personalities. And for me, and I've always been kind of interested in psychology, it's the psychology aspect of it that was really interesting. And just building, like forming those human connections. And because I think you can't really teach a child unless you relate to them, unless you connect to them in some way.
Yeah, no, that's why I can blame a really good English teacher for taking me off of a science track, right? Like, I joke, like I joke about it now because I'm very much in the arts and humanities, not only because of my college experience, but because that's where I ended up post college. In my hobbies are blogging and podcasting and producing movies and doing this, that, and like I'm in the arts and humanities, but I go back to 7th or 8th grade and I thought I was going to be in science. And then I had one amazing English teacher, and in like one semester, I went from all science and all math to like, no, it's all about English and literature and the arts now. That's one teacher, right? Like there's arguments to be said that I would end up here anyway, but that's the power. That's what you're talking about. That's that one connection along the line of like, okay, that's a person who gets it or who is willing to talk to me on that level.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that is what is so cool about teaching. That is the magic of teaching.
But it's got to be a lot though, right? Like you're not there anymore.
No.
But like it's got to be a lot. Like there's got to be a lot. So like I know obviously you talk about it glowingly because you enjoyed your time, but it cannot be all roses the whole way. So like you're not there.
Yes.
I guess let's go with the thought process. Like you're a teacher. When do you start thinking maybe I won't be a teacher? Like where does that come in? Because obviously it's not like you woke up one morning and went, "Oh, I'm done with that."
Yeah. No, I mean you're absolutely right. And that's a great question. So I told you I taught for 10 years. Yep. I would say so around at the beginning of year 8, I started doing a program called the National Boards.
Okay.
So to get this national board certification, it's a 1 to 2 year process. I did mine, and it's this really rigorous, intensive process where you have to film yourself teaching and analyze it and write up all these papers and teach different lessons and reflect on them, and it went well, and I got approved. I got my national boards, and I think so obviously I went through this whole process and thinking I was going to stay in teaching. I wouldn't have committed to it if I was going to stay in teaching, but I think it's part of what sent me on a new path, just because I finished the program and started year 10, and I was like, you know what? I think I've kind of done everything I can do here. I have my master's. I did the national boards. I've made a difference to so many students. I know I did. And you know what? I'm wondering if there's something else out there for me.
Was it the boards that, see, to me, like listening, it's the tape yourself and look at yourself that really starts the internal monologue. Because for me, and this is very apples to oranges, but it's all I have. When I started this podcast, it's listening back to yourself. It's analyzing yourself, even though I'm just editing it to, maybe take out a few seconds or, I mispronounced a word or whatever. I'm not editing to like edit a 90-minute conversation down to 15 minutes. So I'm hearing myself. and
Mm-hmm.
you analyze yourself. You can't help but self-analyze. We do it when we're not like looking at a recording of ourselves, right? So like your mind starts to wander a bit and you go like, what am I doing? What am I listening to? What am I watching, right? And I feel like there's a part of me that listens to you going like, well, if you never took the boards, you'd still be a teacher.
No. And it could be. I mean, that is a really valid point. And I will tell you, there's nothing worse than, watching the same tape of you teaching 100 times in a row, and picking it apart. But, I think part of it too, I mean, the pandemic was really tough on a lot of teachers.
Yeah.
Clearly, we have teachers leaving the profession in droves, honestly. And because we did some teaching virtually, we were in person, we did kind of a hybrid model for a while, and there's a lot of social emotional stress, transitions, all of that, and so I think that probably played a role.
Sure.
In it.
Yeah.
I think it was just the convergence of so many different factors, really. And it came to a head, and I was like, I think it was October of last year, so almost a year now, where I was just kind of like, you know what? I am wondering if there's something else out there for me.
Now, do you have any idea of what that's something? I mean, as we're sitting here a year later, you're doing something, and we'll get to that. But like at that moment, like there's something else out there. Yeah, of course. Like you could be a golfer, a truck driver, a brick builder, like a paint. Like there's, you name it, you can do it.
I love that. Yeah, I know. But you know what? I had gotten into a place, honestly, a psychological place where I was like, this is it for me. Teaching is it for me. This is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And I don't know what else I would possibly do besides be a teacher. And I don't know what kind of, I had a lot of self-doubt. I'm like, I don't know what kind of skills I have to offer any other profession, any other job. I think this is really all I can do. It's sad to think about now,
Well,
but that's where I was.
Well, so we're going to go backwards before we go forwards. I was lucky enough in my marketing profession for the 9 years where I could start the blog that I have now, and I could dip my toe into podcasting because I had a 9 to 5 and I didn't have to really bring work home with me. And I could easily, argue that my writing for the blog would enhance my skills as a marketer, and my conversation skills would help me just with storytelling as I could argue that, right? And I was able to dabble in all these other things. Teaching is a different level of energy, right? Like, were you able to not have hobbies? Because I think that what I just described are like creative pursuits. Not just hobbies. So were you able to have like other creative pursuits while teaching? Is that even possible? Do you have energy for that?
It's really interesting. So, okay. So, because I've thought about this a lot, because creativity is something that's really important to me.
Okay.
But in the beginning, no. Like those first few years where I was a brand new teacher, I mean, I dropped basically all the extra things in my life. I dropped reading even, which is horrible to admit as an English teacher. Like I dropped reading, I dropped writing, I didn't have hardly any hobbies because I was just kind of frantically trying to figure out this whole teaching thing. But then as time went on and I got more, I kind of figured it out. I got a routine down, and I've had a better sense of what I was doing. Then I was able to add hobbies and other creative things back in. And so, I started reading again. I started writing again, just journaling, nothing very big. Found other hobbies like decorating and refinishing furniture and all kinds of things. I found all kinds of ways to kind of keep myself entertained and busy. But on the whole, I'm an introvert for sure. And teaching is a profession that requires you to be on all the time. So I would come home during the work week and I would be super drained and had time, just basically to, spend a little bit of time with my kids and that's about it. So on the weekends I was, doing hobbies and stuff, but not during the week.
I am an introvert. People don't think I am, but I'm absolutely an introvert. Like backed into a corner, I can be an extrovert. Like if I for work functions when I was in marketing, I could work a room. I didn't want to work a room, right? Like there's a difference between having the ability to and then because I walk in and I'm quiet until they're like, "Yo, Jason, say hello." All right, I'll do the versus like the people I walked in with. Like I had a buddy who would just immediately be like, "Hey, yeah, hey, Bob," like it. That was him. I had to be forced to do it. So I get you there. Like it's not easy, and I think it's lost on people mainly because introverts don't talk about this enough. Is just how draining it is to turn that switch on. It is, it's like running two marathons in the span of everybody else running one. Cause your anxiety's up at another level and your head's on a swivel, so to speak. You're not like looking for like enemy attacks or anything, but you're not quite sure cause you're not in your element, right? Like you're in a strange place, even if you've been there 100 times. So like, I get it. And that it's a weird place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did it ever become like, are you still an introvert now? Like, did it change you being on for 7 years?
It did change me for sure. And, I think it helped me kind of grow in my interactions with people. It helped me learn how to communicate with people in, conversation versus words. I've always been okay with doing like the written word thing. But it pushed me out of my comfort zone for sure. Having to talk to kids and sometimes having to, talk to parents, call parents, have open house nights, all of that. I always say it's much harder for me to talk to parents than it is to kids. Kids on a completely different level.
Sure.
But yeah, I completely get what you're saying because I think it's so true. I think introvert versus extrovert. A lot of times people think it's how talkative you are, but really it's about where your energy is. What drains you versus what energizes you, and definitely after a day of teaching, I would feel drained instead of energized.
All right, so let's go forward now, and you're like, okay, there's got to be something else. And like I said, the world's your oyster. Like there's a lot you can do. What are you doing now? Let's start there.
Well, I turned to Google. Not gonna lie. I asked Google the magic 8 ball, basically, what should I do with my life? And I literally started Googling, what careers can teachers explore?
Okay.
Basically. And I started just kind of going down lists, like pulling up listicles and crossing things out as I went. And right, like pretty soon toward the, I don't know, after reading like maybe 3 articles, I'm like, you know what, freelance writing. That's the thing. I think that's going to be what I can do because the during the pandemic when we were teaching remotely, a lot of people didn't like it, but I really liked being at home. I liked teaching from my house and feeling like I was here in my own little introvert cave. And so I was like, ooh, freelance writing, like writing I can do, and I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure I can still do that. And being at home and setting my own hours sounds pretty nice. So let me look into that a little bit more.
Did you try before you buy on this one?
You know what? Yes,
Okay.
kind of. I went into, I remember it so clearly because this was right around our fall break as teachers. So, like I said, it was probably around the last week of October, and when it hit me, I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to go for this, I need to just do it because I'm somebody that will ruminate over decisions forever, and you know, out in my mind a million times, and then 3 years later, I still haven't done anything. So I just kind of went into overdrive mode. And even during that spring break, I mean, that fall break, I was just researching like what types of freelance writers are there. Like, I didn't even know that there were people that did this as a full-time career. So, like, looking into what types of freelance writers are there and how does one become a freelance writer and what skills do I need to have, and just Googling the heck out of it, and had a notebook and I wrote down everything I learned in this physical notebook, and just, worked myself through the process until I was like, you know what, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do. And like you said, I wanted to try before I, committed. And so I decided I was gonna do it part-time on side.
Okay.
Before I made any, pivotal life decisions. So that's kind of what I did. I created a little website, and I that which needs so much work, but I spent 60, 70 hours teaching myself how to do.
You got to remember something, and this is the dirtiest secret in marketing and the service industry. Your own house is always the worst one. Right? It doesn't matter what it is. Like you're you're an editor. Your website's not going to be nearly as great as the stuff you do for your other people. And it's always that way because we spend as a consultant in general, regardless of your field, you spend so much time on your clients. You're never your own number one client. Everybody else is your number one client. So you have no excuses to make here because I have my own agency and I don't even have a website anymore. It just redirects to my blog right now, which is not really professional, but not unprofessional. Anyway, they could all use work. But I do. It leads me to this: when you get your first gig, what is the sense of relief? Or what is the sense? Maybe not relief, but what is the sense when you send in the words and they go, "Yeah, we like it. Here's some money." Like, what is that like? Because that's a first for you.
Yes, that's a crazy feeling. I felt so lucky when I got my first clients. I got my first clients. Well, actually, I got my very first client through Upwork, the freelancing platform.
Yep.
And I remember just being ecstatic that somebody would want to pay me to write something. And it wasn't much. I think they were going to pay me $25 for 1,000 words.
Okay.
And, but, I was like, hey, it's something. It's proof that you can exchange writing for money.
Yeah.
Somebody will pay you for that. So I was just ecstatic. And the people that, I was working for that job were just so lovely and so nice. And, I remember even just getting on a Zoom call with them and thinking, oh, I'm on a Zoom call with someone, like, not about teaching, like something totally new and different. And just feeling like it made it feel really real. Like this is something that could happen. I could see myself doing this in the future. And that was super exciting.
So the question I have for you, because this is what you do now, is do you still write for yourself?
It's a great question. I do. I mean, to be honest, I don't write every day for myself just because sometimes I get to the end of my work day and I think I've written all I can write today. It's just maxed out.
Makes sense.
But I still like it, and it's a different type of writing. For me, I do a lot of reflective writing.
Okay.
Just because it helps me process what's going on in my world and in my head, and it's just a really, I don't know, a good way for me to manage anxiety and stress and all of that stuff. But I do like to do some creative writing too. Not as much as I used to. Back in college, I was like the editor of our college literary magazine. And I was super into it. Like I loved creative writing so much. And I still like it. I still do it, but just not as much as I used to.
I think that's true of all of us. Like I'm a blogger now. Like I have no problem saying that. Like I'm a feature writing blogger basically.
Mm-hmm.
I've written a few short stories over the past decade. And I mean a few, probably a couple. A few might be much. Probably a couple, right? And I've got friends that remember younger me when I would write poetry and short stories like all the time. And they're like, when are you going to do that again? Like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, it's not that I don't have it. Like, clearly it's somewhere in there. But I'm getting enough out when I'm writing what I'm writing. And I don't have, because I get it all the time. And it's a misconception among bloggers, I guess, because I've talked to other bloggers. It's like, well, when are you going to write your book? No, like I'm not writing a blog to as a stepping stone for a book. Like that's not it. The blog's over 10 years. I would have written the book by now if that was the case. Like that's crazy. But like, do you have, I mean, I'm going to be that guy and ask you, like, are you going to write a book? Are there other things for you, within, and I'm not asking for a title and a synopsis, but just, is it like a goal, like I'm going to write a book one day, maybe?
It's funny. Like if you had asked me that question maybe 3 years ago, I would have said no, never.
Okay.
No desire to write a book. But I honestly think that answer would have been rooted more in the thought that I couldn't write a book than not like really desiring to write a book.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I basically I think I've really grown over the last year in the sense of like my confidence of what I can and what I can do and what I can accomplish. And so, I think I could write a book, right? You just break it down into the smaller pieces and, you chunk it. And sure, I could do that. I'm not going to rule it out. I don't know what it would be about. But it might be fun to try one day. Not in the near future, maybe like 5 years.
First, I want to acknowledge how unique Kelly's story is. Most people are more like me, experiencing career complacency once they get something long term. I applaud Kelly not just for thinking about and doing something about what else could be out there, but for her attitude and her try before you buy approach to a career. She spent a decade teaching and only did so after tutoring, and now she's writing after basically moonlighting at it first. That's an important lesson for all of us who have ever thought, is there something else out there for me? And let's be honest, everyone has had that thought. In tough times, it may be prevalent, but in good times, it may still hover around the periphery of your thoughts. Still, We've all been there at one point or another, and perhaps just trying something temporary is the way to go. But the similarities of Kelly's story to episode 58's guest, Rob Eskra, are something I can't escape. I feel like teachers are similar to lawyers, where you get to a point and it's either you move on, you move up, or you move out. Maybe I want to remain a bit optimistic about some things, but I would be willing to bet that most professions have a Google search, which is alternative careers for a profession. You've heard countless career trajectory changes on not only the episodes I've mentioned in this episode, but in many of the conversations I've had. Careers are very rarely entirely linear. Sure, they go from one thing to the next, but it's very rarely ever a constant line in the same direction. And perhaps that's just a reflection of the fact that life is rarely ever a constant singular direction. That may be too much philosophy for right now, but just remember this. No matter where you are or what you do, there's almost always something else out there for you if you want it. And perhaps you should think about trying what could be next in order to figure out just what that is. Good luck. And remember, just because something doesn't work out, it just means that's one singular thing in all the opportunities and options that you can cross off. On to the next one. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 81. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Kelly Fiorini at Kelly F Copy, that's KELLYFCOPY, and this show at The Palmer Files. You can find more information about Kelly at kellyfiorini.com, that's KELLYFIORINI, where you can not only contact her and see what she's done, but you can read and follow her blog. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Kelly, do you have one final question for me?
I do. So one thing I've been kind of wondering, talking to you, is where do you see yourself headed? So say 5 years from now, what are you going to be doing?
I mean, I don't know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I've been, I guess, self-employed for the better part of just before the pandemic. And I bounced from gig here to gig there and spent a lot of time networking. And I've said this before. People, when they're trying to help you when you're networking, will say, what do you want to do? Because they need some direction. They can't help you. They can't, like, if you want to be a doctor, they can point you in a direction. You want to be a teacher, they can point you in a direction. You want to be a marketer, a writer, a director, whatever, they can point you in a direction. The worst thing you can say to somebody who wants to help you is, I don't know. And that's still my answer. Because I think that I am blessed and cursed with too many options. And so in 5 years, I would like to make sure I'm still paying my bills and contributing to the household. My partner makes more than me, but she's got a full-time job. I do not. And so I just want to be able to contribute in some way, financially. As far as like emotionally or like metaphysically or whatever, like I get to create. As far back as I can remember, I've always wanted to create, and I can't not call it a fault, call it a plus, a minus, whatever. Like, if I'm not, I like the blog has kind of manifested itself as I'm creating something once a week, or sometimes twice a week. The podcast has kind of amped that up, so now it's 6 times a month I'm putting something out into the internet. And it's come up on this show before. I'm a very big believer in trying to balance the ledger of content created versus content consumed. Mm-hmm. And I know it's never going to be 50-50. As humans, we consume too much to be able to literally put out that much stuff. Right. I had insomnia last night. So I consumed, 5 hours of TV while my partner was sleeping and just watching stuff. So clearly I can't. And today I wrote a blog post. I don't know what that equates to in hours of like consuming. And you and I are doing this podcast, which is going to record for about an hour and a half, and I'll edit it down to 115 or 109 or whatever it ends up being. I'm not hitting 50-50, right? I strive to. It's never going to happen. So, but I still need that outlet. And I have, I'm a strike while the iron's hot kind of guy. This 4 days ago, I wrote 2 posts because I was inspired and I had either watched the right things or read the right things, or I had an idea of a thing I wanted to write. But just knowing that my skill sets open all these doors for me is as exciting as it is scary, because I have to pick a door. Right. Yeah. And so I helped produce a movie. It's, as we speak, it's in production. By the time this airs, it'll be close to the end of our production. And I mixed the sound on it only because I've been messing around with podcast sound, right? Like, these are skills I have, didn't know that they were applicable there. Mm-hmm. But now I know that I could produce a small budget movie. And I know that I can produce a podcast and edit a podcast and a blog. And I've edited a book of poetry, and I've edited a short story, and I've edited a novel that I'm going to beat the author over the head until we actually publish said novel. But all of those things are vastly different, and yet they still all fill my soul, like my creative soul. Like, I don't have to do it. Like, that's the other thing I learned. Like, I don't have to do the thing. I can just be a part. I can be a facilitator, and that's good enough for me. Like, mm-hmm. I'm helping with this movie. I'm a producer, but I'm not editing it. I didn't shoot it. I'm just there to facilitate it into the world. And that's fulfilling enough for me. But it also means that people don't know what I do, because all of the things that come to my mind when what do you do? Not what do you want to be? That's the harder question. What do you do? I just get to be vague. Like, I'm a blogger, because then they go, well, what do you write about? Or how often, or whatever. Like, I'm a podcaster. Well, who do you talk to? And if I say I'm a producer, they go, well, what do you like? No one knows what those, like, producer, blogger, podcaster, even editor. These things are vague concepts to most people. If you're not doing them, you have no idea what I just said. I just said 4 words. And so I have all these options. I would like to help people, generally speaking. I've done a lot more for people than I have for money. I'm not like a bottom dollar kind of guy. Like, I mean, I think those around me know my worth a lot more than I do. And it could be an introvert thing. I don't know, because it's not a thing that happens. Like, I help people when I can, and that's good enough. And maybe my privilege is showing, because like I had saved for a very long time while I was employed, and so I can weather these kind of storms and carve out a life for me. But in 5 years, I guess, as long as I'm helping people or I'm still doing this stuff, it would be cool to maybe find the next bigger thing, which is new, right? The movie, I had a friend was doing it all by himself. And I was like, I think I can help you. He's like, I don't think you can. And I was like, no, I really think I can help you here. And so, you know, and that will probably be an episode on this show to come when we release it. And we get to tell the story about how I helped him. But I think now I'm looking for the next step up, let's say. And I don't know what that is. And the blog just kind of came to me one day. The podcast I had been teased about for a long time because I was being on other people's shows and I was producing other people's shows. I wasn't doing my own. And then I finally took that step. And the movie, that was just kind of happenstance. It's like being in the right place at the right time and saying, I'm going, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to help you anyway. And you know, my best friend's the writer of poetry, and I'm always going to be available for him as an editor. And I think that I just kind of, I'm here for the creative space. And yeah, not a lot of money in it, right? Like you got to be in the 1% of the 1% of the 1% to make a living doing all of the things I just described. But as long as there's a roof over my head, and I get to eat and there's plenty of coffee around, I'm good. Like, I think I've set my, I don't know. I'm not looking forward to like, oh, one day I'll release my own movie studio or whatever. Like, no, I don't think that big. But that's, so I guess, I'm going to put up my sail and wherever my boat goes,
I love that.
I hope I'll be prepared for it.
I love that because I 100% relate. You know, it's just creating and helping people.
And I will say this, having been in marketing and around marketing, and the pandemic taught me a lot from afar because I wasn't employed. So I got to watch people get overworked, and I got to watch, you know, budgets and staff get cut. And I got to learn the value of storytelling in a way that I still don't think people value yet the way they should. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, people look at marketing as it's just the message, but not anymore. We live in a world where any YouTuber may have, any random YouTuber that, you know, does it for full time might have more followers than the brand of soft drink you're drinking, potentially. And so what does that mean? You know, they tell better stories than the brand? Probably. You know, and so for me, I'm starting to think it's all about storytelling. It's also about posturing a little bit, but I don't want to play it's a statement I make a lot. I don't want to play the game. Like, mm-hmm. Do you want to hire me? Oh, you want me to jump through hoops? No, I'm not. That's somebody else. That's somebody younger. That's somebody who really wants a career. I just want to help you tell your story. Mm-hmm. You don't want that? That's fine. Good. Have fun. Like I'll find a way. It's good. But I think back and I think that, and you will find this the more that you kind of get out there, not as a salesperson, but just looking around at what everybody else is doing, and you go, oh, wow, they need my help, but they don't know that.
Right. And
most of those people are too proud to say they're wrong. And that's a whole different ballgame. But it's just, you know, I guess I'm just here to help people. Well, I guess that's an imperative. I don't want to make it a question, but very much it's, I don't know, question mark.
I think it's okay to not know. You know, that's like kind of the spot I've been in my whole life, I think, is not really knowing and being up for change whenever it comes.
I mean, that's how you end up with a liberal arts degree.
It's so true.